Today is Monday, April 12th, and it is 3:11 p.m. and I'm here with Cindy at Geneva United Methodist Church. My name is Brenann Hamilton. Thank you so much for interviewing with us today. So if you could please state your full name, your role as a student at the consolidated school that you went to and the name of that school, and then what years you attended school.
Okay, that I am Cindy Malcom, and it was Cindy Mason Malcom, Hampton and Hansell consolidated in the school year of 1961-1962. I was 12 years old. I attended Hampton School, and I was entering 7th grade when the consolidation happened. At that time, we had junior high at Hansell, so I took the bus from Hampton over to Hansell for the 7th and 8th grade class. To me, it was more of an adventure. I was familiar with the Hansell area as far as the town because my grandma lived there. I was aware of the layout of the town, the school, known it all my life, all my childhood. So the main thing was, for me, it was just kind of an adventure.
Going back to your childhood, when were you born?
I was born April 18th, 1949, so in just a few days I'll be 72. My sister had attended Geneva School, and she was 12 years older than me. So by the time she graduated from Geneva, my parents had the choice whether I should go to Geneva to school or go to Hampton. We lived halfway in between, and they chose Hampton. So my sister graduated in the spring, and I started kindergarten in Hampton and had gone to the same school my whole first 6 years plus kindergarten. So the interesting thing was, for me, is that in our 7th grade homeroom, I sat in alphabetical order behind my now husband, and we never dated at all through junior high, high school, not till after high school, but that's how I met, through him, through the consolidation. I did talk to his sister yesterday, told her that we were going to have this interview, and she told me a different side of it. She's 2 years older than me. She would have started Hampton as a freshman, coming from the small town of Hansell, and she said it was very upsetting to her. She was very comfortable in her small town school, and that triggered a couple more memories that I had of my cousin, who was going to be, I believe, in 10th grade and possibly 11th grade, and it was too much for her. She came from the smaller town. She just couldn't handle it. She quit school and got her GED, and another neighbor of ours was the same situation. She was starting her 10th year at Hampton, and she couldn't handle it either. She just quit entirely. So those are a few different thoughts than I had had. I guess all in all, my experience was pretty good with the consolidation. And then we graduated, it was called Hampton Community at that time, and I graduated from Hampton Community High School in 1967.
So I know that you mentioned that the kids coming from Hansell seemed to have a really hard time coming in. How did people from Hampton feel about the situation?
I don't think that there was that much problem from my point of view from just being in junior high. I mean, I didn't hear that much about it. My parents weren't that concerned about it. One of the main things would have been maybe just how the bus routes were going to be. We were on a farm, and that was the main thing, is probably just how the bus ride would affect it. You know, from my point of view, it didn't bother at all. Never heard my parents discuss it that much, or with neighbors, just referring to this neighbor girl and my mom's niece who came from the smaller school, and it was just too much for them. They were shyer, more introverted.
Did the class sizes, obviously it got larger, how much larger when Hansell was added?
I can't remember that. I know in grade school we would have had 2 classes for each grade, and I just can't remember how it did affect because we were going to a whole different setup. We had homerooms and we would move from class to class.
So I know that you mentioned your family earlier, and you had a sister. What was your sister's name?
My sister's name was Dixie, and she was 12 and a half years older than me. So by the time I started kindergarten, she had graduated with none of us in between. And then my brother Lance is 3 years younger than me. So he went through basically the same schooling that I did, the same school, same grade school. And I can't remember how long we had actual junior high at Hansell before they switched over to maybe 5th and 6th. I just can't remember. And the other classes would have been back to Hampton.
When you were a child, what were some of your interests?
We lived on a farm, and my dad was a hired man, and the 2 owners lived close by. There were 2 other hired men's families that lived really close. So we were almost like a little commune in our own area right there. It was all easily within walking distance. We always had kids to play with. We had the owner's grandchildren. I refer to it as kind of an enchanted childhood. We could go to the creek, ride our bikes, neighbors around, played baseball. Just always had kids around and always felt comfortable. I just think it was an ideal childhood. And maybe economically wasn't, because we had a pretty tight budget. I know Mom and Dad both struggled to keep things going, but we had a happy childhood.
I know that you mentioned that your house was halfway between Geneva and Hampton. Yep. So how far away was that? What was the distance, would you say?
Our house was 4 miles to Hampton. And 4 miles to Geneva, basically.
How did you get to school every day?
Always on the school bus. It was very rare that Mom would pick us up, maybe more in high school, once in a while if she happened to be in town, but always the school bus. Never thought about having a car or ever driving to school.
Did you like school as a kid?
I did. Always had friends. I wasn't that active in sports or clubs or anything like that. I think I always was afraid that it would affect Mom and Dad coming to town to get me or taking me to town. And I guess I just wasn't that interested, and I feel the same way now. I'm content just being at home, doing my own thing. So, and like I said, we always had plenty of kids around to play with and to be active with.
So what did you want to be when you grew up?
I guess the thought of going to college never entered my head that much. I knew I wanted to get married, have a family, and then in later years of high school, I decided I wanted to go to beauty school. So at that time, it didn't cost that much. I think maybe $1,300 for the 13 months of schooling. And I would work through the summer for Northrop King, work in the fields, detasseling, hoeing corn, pollinating corn, did that all through high school years. And from the time I was probably 14 on through high school, Mom and I would detassel ourselves just to get extra money so I could put that away for school. So I did go to beauty school, and within a few months got married and was with my husband when he was in the service, and we had a little boy then, and 6 years later another little boy moved back to the area, and he farmed with his dad, and again, good life continued.
Yeah, and which war was your husband in?
He was in, it was during the Vietnam War time, and he was 1 year in Korea, and most of the other time we lived in Las Vegas, which is very strange for 2 Iowa farm kids to be thrown into Las Vegas in 1970.
Going back to school, what was your earliest memory of school?
I can remember kindergarten, and that was at Park School in Hampton. And we went in the morning and rode the regular bus, and then right before lunch was an older station wagon with an older man. For us at that time, he probably wasn't that old at all. But the interesting thing was he only had one arm. So for a kindergartner, that was kind of interesting. And so he would bring us home, and I can remember that. I remember kids I played with, games that we played, just things that I can remember from the day. And then grade school was at the Franklin Building in Hampton. And to us little kids, it almost looked like a castle. It's been torn down, I'm not sure when, probably in the 70s, but it was a great big school with the exterior tubular fire escapes. So that was my kindergarten, and 1st through 6th grade were at the Franklin Building.
So what did a typical morning before school look like?
We always laugh about that. It would be, probably dad or mom hollering for us to get up, and the idea of a shower every morning before school, that just didn't happen. You had maybe twice a week a bath. So it was during the time of back-combed hair and bouffant hairstyles. So in high school, I think, sleeping on the rollers, hoping your hair was dry, doing your hair, being upstairs in my room with a little transistor radio, crackling and staticky and trying to get some of the songs. Breakfast, I think mostly just cereal. We didn't all sit down to a big meal. And like I said before, my brother was 3 years younger than I was, so he was always there with me. And then we would just wait for the bus and see all of our friends, and wasn't that far on into school.
So what did you typically wear to school? Did you have a uniform or a dress code?
No, the only thing as far as a dress code, we had to wear skirts in high school. And the joke always was that you had to kneel on the floor if a teacher thought your skirt was too short, and it had to hit the floor. The bend in your knees had to hit your skirt had to hit the floor. And knee socks a lot in navy blue and cranberry, V-neck sweaters with Oxford collar shirts. I remember as a child when we'd play outside, we didn't have nice snow boots. They would be just little rubber boots that would fit over your shoes. I remember when I got my first parka, a hooded coat. Otherwise, you just wear a little knitted scarf and knitted gloves, no insulated gloves. And we were always cold. If we'd play outside, we'd always be chapped around our wrist or chapped around our ankles. School still had the radiators, so if you were outside and got wet, it was that smell of the drying mittens and scarves. One thing that we did play a lot in the winter, we always were out with our sleds, and in the summer always on our bikes. There were always kids around. We'd make forts, pick blackberries, go to the creek and catch minnows. My mom would gather up neighbor kids and we'd go down to the creek and she'd pack a little lunch for us and we'd go wading. The city swimming pool opened, I believe, when I was in high school, but we didn't really go there. We'd go to Beeds Lake and swim, or I said just go wading in the creek, and Mom would get her suntan while we were there.
So when you were at school, what did the school building look like, and kind of like from the outside and the inside?
The grade school we always referred to as the castle, like I said, the old Franklin building, and it was really tall, squarish, just had a look of a European castle about it. The junior high at Hansell would have been there, I think, wholly elementary, junior high, high school when it was just Hansell. And it was probably 2 stories and 3 stories and more of an oblong brick shape.
Did your school have any defining features that you remember? Like a basement, gym, cafeteria?
For the grade school, I remember going downstairs for the cafeteria, and typical meals would be macaroni, mashed potatoes, corn, canned fruit. It was a big deal then in probably the late 50s when we first started to have homemade pizza, and that was a treat. And when I read the school menus now, I just can't imagine those being hot lunches, that it just seems so different from what we would have had. And I always thought the rich kids took cold lunch because they had their chips and their sandwiches and their fruit. And I always thought that was a big deal. So I would beg Mom every once in a while to be able to take cold lunch. And usually it was just hot lunch. And I remember that we'd have to go to a special room to have our cold lunch.
For lunch, did you get to sit with whoever you wanted, or was it by like class? Did you have a seating chart?
Not a chart. We were in the basement for grade school of the Franklin building, and it was just big wooden tables with benches, and we'd go through the line, get our plates, and I think it would be by classes, but it would be pretty much however we tend to line up, and teachers would check your plate to see if you were done or could be excused, and then run out for recess. And we just had the basics, merry-go-rounds, swings, teeter-totters. I remember playing marbles a lot in the spring, and there were a few bars that we could do gymnastics or swing on a little bit. Not too much in the way of equipment, I guess I would say. That it was a big schoolyard and we could play any games. I remember there was always the teacher out during the recess duty.
Did your school provide toys for you to play with out there, or were you expected like to bring balls or something from home?
No, they would have basketballs, and it was a big deal when tetherball first came out for school. And we'd take turns doing tetherball.
Going back to lunch, how did you pay for your lunch?
I think we just took money and the teacher kept track of it. In later years, we had lunch tickets that were punched just a week at a time. I think grade school lunch was maybe 25 to 35 cents. Lunch wasn't expensive by today's means at all, but back then it was probably just as hard for a family to get that. 35 cents a day allotted into the budget if they had several children.
When you arrived at school, did your school ever offer a breakfast program?
Never. Not that I ever knew of. And the idea of reduced lunches, we might be whispering amongst ourselves that we didn't think so-and-so had to pay for lunch. We just weren't really aware of that.
So when you arrived at school, how did the day typically begin?
Probably just go into our room, visit amongst ourselves, play a little bit, and then when the bell rang, we'd start out with Pledge of Allegiance and any announcements maybe the teacher'd have, which wasn't that many.
So how many students were in your school in your graduating class?
I believe 114, and in our day-to-day classes about 20. And one thing I remember that still sticks in my mind from second grade is that we evidently had a parakeet, which I don't remember, but I don't remember having it on a day-to-day basis, but I remember Mom inviting my second grade teacher out for supper that night with her boyfriend because she was being given our parakeet. And I don't remember anything about the parakeet. I just remember what a big deal it was to have my second grade teacher come and have supper at the house. So she left with a parakeet, and I obviously never gave it a thought again.
So when you were at school, what classes did you take?
In high school, whatever kind of science class. I don't believe I took chemistry. Can't remember that much. I took government and whatever English classes we had to take. Biology, American history, probably world history, basic math, algebra. don't know, I can't remember that much.
Do you have any favorite or least favorite classes?
I think I did like biology a lot. I like numbers, but I can't remember that I was that maybe good at it. I didn't do calculus or an advanced algebra. I said biology and the sciences. I liked to read. I liked English, and basically I didn't have trouble with school. My grades were okay, and my husband and I both talked about how we always took home homework. We always took an armload of homework home. And of course then no computers, so everything was just all written out by hand, but always homework.
What sort of school supplies did you use?
Well, for grade school, it was just the basics. I mean, a new pack of crayons, probably the Big Chief tablet. I don't even think we had spiral notebooks then. In the early years, just our penmanship notebooks.
What is a Big Chief tablet?
Big Chief tablet would have been rougher, more pressed wood, and it hooked at the top with adhesive, and it had a big Indian chief picture on the front, and the inside was lined for our penmanship. It was dotted lines in between two solid lines so we could do our penmanship. I don't remember that we ever had ink pens in grade school or ballpoint pens. I do remember one time in about second grade, I finished my paper. I wasn't happy with some coloring, so I just scribbled all over it and asked the teacher for another mimeograph page so I could color it again, and she said, "Nope, they're all gone. What you did, you turn in." Well, It was totally ruined, but I learned a lesson that day. Don't scribble out your paper when you think it's not good enough, expecting to be able to do it over again.
So did you have any official art classes, or was that just incorporated into the class setting?
No, we would go to an art room, and I believe our art teacher's name was Mr. Swanson in the Franklin building, and I can't remember any of the projects we did, but we would go to a separate art room and a separate music room.
So what were some of the things that you did in art?
I can't remember anything particularly, just can't remember what we did do for projects.
I know you mentioned you had a music room. Did you like music? Did you have to take it?
We all went to music in grade school, and I probably didn't realize at that time that I wasn't the least bit musical, that I couldn't sing and probably couldn't follow the music. But in grade school, in the early grades, we probably had maybe tambourines or drums or bells. One thing that I remember was our Christmas program at school. It was a big school building for the grade school. There were 2 classes for each grade. And at Christmas time, we would go up the main center stairs that were very wide, and we'd be around the inside balcony, and we'd sing all of our Christmas songs just for the class or the classes. And then we would go over to the high school auditorium and put on spring programs for our parents to come, and just like they do now, the same, themes, and that was always a big deal when we'd have our spring programs.
Did you ever use the Fullerton Music Education?
Not that I ever knew of.
Okay, sounds good. And then did you ever join choir or band, as you got into high school?
No, like I said, not the least bit musical, and those 2 were just out as far as I was concerned.
So did your school offer any physical education or PE?
Yes, we had PE, and I can't remember so much in grade school, but in high school it was volleyball, basketball, dodgeball, and in later years we would learn the rules. I mean, we would have pamphlets just telling us how the rules were and what to be done.
Was PE separated between boys and girls?
Yes.
Did you ever have to wear a specific uniform for PE?
All I can remember was we had to wear tennis shoes that were kept at school. They weren't our street shoes at all to be in the gym. We'd wear shorts and just white button-down blouses. And high school was probably the first that we would shower before we went back to class.
Yeah. How often did you have PE?
I can't remember, but it was twice a week or just once a week.
Okay. Did you always have to take PE, or did your school offer any alternatives?
No, you had to take PE.
The presidential fitness test at all during PE?
I think we did, yes.
Okay. Did you like doing that?
I didn't mind it.
Did you participate in any sports?
I did basketball for maybe freshman and sophomore, and then during the sophomore year, I just discontinued.
What were the competitions like?
I didn't play that much, so I mean I would go on with the buses and be with the other girls, but I just didn't play. I wasn't that active, didn't play that much, and I don't feel like I was really into it enough that I cared about it that much. And I mean, I would be interested if we won the game or lost the game, but I didn't think of school rivalries that much, and I really wasn't that involved.
So did your school offer any foreign language classes?
In 6th grade, we had a televised Spanish class, and we still remember Senor Siqueiros, and he would lead our 6th grade Spanish class just over TV. And I don't know if that came out of Mason City, broadcast out of Mason City. And then junior high, we were offered Spanish, and I think that was all that we ever had. I never took Spanish in high school.
Did you like it when you had it in 6th grade?
Yes.
So did your school offer any special education classes or gifted classes at all?
I just don't think that we did. We had honor society, but I don't remember that there were any gifted classes.
Did your school have a guidance counselor?
Yes.
Was their job primarily focused on helping students apply for colleges, or did they also kind of function as an on-site therapist?
I would say just for college. The idea of going to a counselor or a therapist would have been so far out of our thoughts at that time.
Okay, yeah. So mental health was not really discussed at all? Okay,
no.
Yeah. So did your school offer any like shop classes, home ec classes, like homemaker classes, stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay, did you take any of those classes?
Yes, I took home ec, and probably all the years that I could or that was necessary. And I enjoyed that a lot, and sewing, cooking.
What would you say is the most interesting thing that you made or cooked or did in any of those classes?
The one cooking thing that I remember or two things, were an asparagus dish with a hollandaise sauce that I've never made since then, and cocoa from scratch with actual cocoa and sugar and milk instead of just taking, a teaspoon of prepared chocolate and putting it in a cup. And I remember a pink sleeveless dress that I made.
Would you say that you still use the skills that you learned there to this day?
Yes.
Did your school teach driver's ed, or did you take that from a private company?
No, our school provided that.
Okay. Was it mandatory, or did you get a choice?
I don't feel comfortable saying it was mandatory, but I think everybody just took it. It was offered. It didn't cost that much, and yes, when it was time for driver's ed, we just took driver's ed.
So did you learn practical skills, or was it just focused on how to drive specifically?
Oh no, it was practical skills. And I still remember in fact, it's in the neighborhood I live in now by the post office, there was a big dip in the street, and our instructor would take us over that dip, and we felt the bump, and that was our practical education there, was to slow down when you saw there was that dip in the street, and how to parallel park.
Did you ever have to change a tire or any of that sort of
No,
things?
we never had to change a tire. never had the hood up to look at the inside of the car. We always drove with a partner. I don't even remember that we went to even Mason City, maybe just down the highway, but I don't remember ever being on an interstate.
Did your school teach you cursive?
Yes, and that's one thing that I just can't get over now, that it's an option whether kids should be taught cursive, but that was such a big part of our education, and how to hold your pencil or your pen. And I just feel the handwriting is so different now, and I see kids writing that to me are holding their pens in such an awkward position. And it was really a big deal in third grade when you would learn cursive. And another thing that I remember was learning to tell time on an actual clock. And my little granddaughters are 8 and 11, and I will say, I'll be over at your house at 5:45. That quarter till doesn't mean anything to them. They say, Grandma, we don't know that time. Tell us in our time. They know 5:45. They only know digital. I just don't know, I haven't pinned them down to see how much they do know, but they don't know the quarter till or 20 after. It would be 10:20.
So what were your teachers like?
Probably no nonsense. I wouldn't have thought of ever crossing a teacher. Never to talk back. Always respected them. I don't remember, they were the warm fuzzy type. I just remember they were just there at school, especially the grade school. You didn't realize that they had a life outside of school, and I think that's probably why that struck me so much, that my teacher came for supper, that they could have been just in school like the books or the pens. They were just there. And in grade school, except for the art teacher, it was unheard of to have a man teacher. They were usually young, 20-ish something, a few older married teachers, but most of them were in their 20s, but always women.
Yeah, so what did teachers typically wear to school?
Women always dresses or skirts and tops, probably nylons every day. Never, I don't remember any what we would have called anklets or just socks. In high school, always dress pants and a dress shirt and suit coat. Maybe not always the suit coat, but usually a dress shirt and tie.
And as a student, what was expected of you? And did you always come prepared for lessons?
I think so. From my point of view, you wanted to please. There was the respect, and what the teacher said was what went. And of course you said, were you always prepared? No, there were times that you would be finishing homework on the bus or when you first got to school. I don't remember any issues with discipline particularly.
How did the school day end?
Usually about 3:20 with the bell, and there'd be the lineup of buses, and you would just run on out to your bus. And sometimes you'd have to go to a different school, switch buses for the country, and it could vary between sometimes a half hour before we'd get home. And that's one thing my mom, and I think most moms at that time, didn't work outside the home, and they were always at home. It was very rare if I went home and my mom wasn't home. Dad worked, like I said, on the farm, and supper was usually at 6 o'clock, and TV in the evenings, doing homework.
So when you were in school, did you ever have to take Iowa Basic Skills, ITBS, Iowa Assessments, any sort of standardized
yes,
test?
always basic skills, and that would put us into such a tizzy. I mean, it was just so traumatic for me anyway, to have the pens and fill the circles completely. And I always did well, but it was just a trauma to go through this. They made such a big deal about the Iowa Test basic skills.
Would you say that your scores were pretty consistent?
Yes.
Did you ever have to take the SAT or ACT?
I didn't.
Okay. And did you ever have to take any tests to determine aptitude or future job opportunities?
Not that I remember.
Did your school ever have any fire drills, tornado drills, duck and cover drills, any of those?
Just fire drills. And like I said, for the grade school, that was another traumatic experience because they were the exterior tubes. And in later years, they were getting pretty rough. And if you were in the upper levels, you'd get some pretty good speed going before you got to the bottom. And I remember there'd usually be 2 6th grade boys at the bottom to catch us.
Did you ever have any incidents regarding safety at your school?
No.
So what was the typical school year-round schedule like? Like what breaks did you have? When did it start? When did it stop? That sort of thing?
I'm thinking mostly late August. We would have probably Thursday and Friday for Thanksgiving, Christmas, about the 2 weeks, about similar to what they have now, but never was it referred to as spring break. It was always Easter vacation, which was probably Thursday, Friday, sometimes Monday. And school would usually be out the end of May. I don't remember ever going into June.
What did you typically do during your summer breaks?
Summer was fun in the grade school times. We either had cousins over that we'd go over to. I said go just fishing down to the creek, going on picnics, going out in the timber. Every summer we would go to Minnesota to a cabin for Dad's week vacation. The farmers that he worked for had a cabin in northern Minnesota. We'd go up there. That was just the big deal that we always looked forward to.
Would you say that was pretty typical for other kids in your area to do similar things that you did, or?
I think so. If you were on the farm, well, we had horses, so we ride our horses. I would say we were all pretty much alike. We didn't have very much growing up, but I didn't realize that. Mom always did her best to do for us what she could, and I never felt any different.
So, did your school offer any dances or class parties like prom or homecoming? Or?
We had prom, we had homecoming. In the junior high years, we would have school dances. Skating was a big deal, probably twice a year we would have roller skating. And then in high school, the Christmas formal, homecoming, the Christmas formal, prom, and probably some other dances through the year.
Was homecoming considered a formal event?
I can't think that it was particularly. I mean, you would wear a nice dress, but not like a prom dress, not a formal. Maybe the queen candidates would, but not as much as what the Christmas formal or prom would be.
So were there any special events at your school that involved the larger community?
Not that I think of, no.
And was your school building itself ever used for community events or anything?
Our high school had a big auditorium, one of the nicest probably in the area. And besides school events, I think there would probably be community events there.
So do you remember any major local, national, or world events that occurred during your school years?
I can still remember that I was in, I believe, 10th grade, and it was study hall when they announced that John Kennedy had been assassinated. So that was, one thing I can still picture perfectly clearly. I don't remember watching the news or being aware of as much worldly things as what I do now, or what I think kids, even younger kids now, are aware of so much that's going on in the world that I don't think either I wasn't interested in or exposed to.
So what are some important takeaways that you want people to remember from your school experiences?
Looking back, it just seems like we just did what was expected of us. We rode the bus, went to school, did our work, had friends, had kids maybe stay over, or we'd go stay overnight with other kids. I feel our life anyway, or my life, family stability. I don't remember anybody in our class coming from a divorced family, divorced parents. Like I said, it's looking back, it was a happy childhood. So we grew up in the 50s, early 60s.
So do you have a best or worst day of school?
Not particularly.
In your opinion, what are some of the biggest changes to education over the years? Maybe comparison, contrast of back then versus now.
Well, of course, technology would be the main thing. We just had our textbooks, movies or film strips. That would be the only outside thing if the teachers, would ever do a film strip to add to any textbook information. That was always a big deal. No, not anything too different.
And is there anything else that maybe we just haven't gotten the chance to talk to that you wanted to talk about?
Well, one thing is that we had never, my husband and I were in the same class, had never gone to a class reunion until our 50th 2 years ago. And we just really, really enjoyed it. And I have a friend that just moved back to Hampton that I hadn't seen for those 50 years. And we have enjoyed spending time together this past 6 months. And her memories trigger my memories, and we just talk a lot about the school days. So it's been fun.
Thank you so much for
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Brenann.
interviewing with me today. I'm just gonna